Hey guys, it's Courtney. Today we're going to be making three very simple cards using the Layering Pine stencil set, as well as the Merry Christmas Sentimini stamp and die set, and two of the Blending Buddy brushes. I have 3 panels of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock here, and they are all cut down with a stitched rectangle die. So to create my background, I'm taking another scrap piece of cardstock here, and I'm kind of just freehanding a curved line. And this is basically going to be my little snowbank. I'm going to be using this as a mask. You can certainly use an actual mask, but this is just simple for me. There is also stencils on the market that will create this for you as well. But again, this is free because I'm just using some scrap paper. So to create my background, I'm going to be using broken china and tumbled glass distress oxide. I'm just putting that mask down on the bottom portion of my card panel, added a little bit of the broken china, and then I'm going to kind of blend that out with the tumbled glass and kind of fade off to white. So I'm just concentrating my darkest areas being right above that snowbank, right in the center part of my card panel. I did add a little bit more broken china to get just a little bit more variation in color. Most of this is going to be covered up anyway. And I did the same exact thing with all 3 of the card panels. Once that's done, we're going to go ahead and add our trees. So I'm going to take the first layer here, which is the solid layer of the tree, and I'm going to line that up directly onto my little snowbank there. I did take some Post-it note tape to tape this down so it doesn't shift around. However, I probably should have added a little bit more to the left-hand side because my brush kind of went beyond the stencil a little bit, but we'll fix that in a minute. I'm going to use some Evergreen Bough Distress Oxides to cover up this entire area, and I did this with all 3 card panels, this time making sure that I actually tape down and mask off that left-hand side. Now, you can use any inks for this. I do recommend using Distress Oxides or a pigment ink because they are a little bit more opaque and you can cover up your background or at least mask it off a little bit. You may see a little bit shine through, but I'm okay with that just as long as I'm seeing my green more than I'm seeing my blue. Where if you use a regular dye ink, they're not opaque. So once that's done, I'm going to take my second layer here and I'm going to line that up, and there's little etching areas in the stencil, so it's very easy to line up. Once I have that down, I'm going to go ahead and take more Post-it note tape to make sure that doesn't shift around, and I'm going to be using Mowed Lawn, and I'm just going to cover up that stencil. Now there's a little bit more intricate areas this layer, so you want to be careful not to kind of move that stencil area around. Again, I lined this up and did this on all 3 of my card panels, and then we're going to add the tree trunk, I guess you could call it. There's ornaments in this set, there's stars in this set, but for these cards, we're just going to make the tree themselves. So I'm going to line that up, and you can see that it fits pretty snug right into the bottom portion of the tree. There's really no guesswork when it comes to lining these stencils up. They really can only fit one way. I'm going to be using Vintage Photo Distress Oxide ink just to add a little bit of color. I'm not really worried about any variation, but you can certainly do shading by using multiple colors or by kind of adding a little bit more of a darker area and kind of blending that out a little bit. But in this case, I just went in solid. Now I did have one area that my stencil shifted a little bit, or my brush kind of slipped underneath the stencil, but again, we can fix that up with no problem later on. So once I had my tree trunk down for all 3 of the trees, we're going to add the 3rd layer in different ways. So for this first one, we're going to keep it nice and simple. I'm going to go ahead and line that up, again, using those etched lines within the stencil to make sure that everything is lined up perfectly. Going to go ahead and use some more Post-it note tape to make sure that this doesn't shift around when adding my 3rd layer. For this one, we're just going to be adding another layer of ink. Going to make sure that my Blending Buddy brush is cleaned off, and I'm going to be using Lucky Clover for this one. And again, this is a little bit more intricate, so you want to be careful that you're not shifting that stencil around, and you can see that you get a nice, through all 3 greens kind of showing through there. For this next one, I am going to be using some Glimmer Paste by Tonic Studios. And this is the clear. I guess it's clear, but there's different colors. There's gold. You can use anything you want here. You can either use the glimmer paste or regular texture paste, whatever you choose. I'm going to be using one of my palette knives here, and I'm just going to go ahead and add that on there, and just making sure that it's as smooth as I can possibly get it, very carefully removing the stencil to make sure that the glimmer paste doesn't slip into areas that you don't want it to be. And you'll want to make sure that you clean your stencil and your palette knife immediately, because this stuff dries pretty quickly. So I went ahead and put that aside to dry. And for the third and final card, we are going to be adding some snow for this third layer. And this is the easiest way to do it. So I'm taking my anti-static tool, adding that to my card panel, also to the back of my stencil as well. Taping that down with some more Post-it note tape, and then I'm going to be adding Versamark ink. And you want to make sure that you can use any embossing ink here, but you want to make sure that you're using one that has a really squishy pad, so you can kind of squish your way in between the grooves of the stencil. You also want to make sure that this panel is completely dry. The ink is completely dry before moving on to this step. I actually let mine dry overnight just to be sure that my embossing powder doesn't stick to areas I don't want it to be. Going to go ahead and carefully remove that stencil and sprinkle on some white embossing powder, and making sure that my heat gun is heated up for about 30 to 45 seconds before bringing that to the paper. This will minimize the amount of warping that you have. And you can see that I didn't necessarily get all of those little grooves or all of those little areas filled in with that Versamark. Therefore, my embossing powder didn't stick to all of those areas. So I'm just going to take a white gel pen and kind of fix up some of those areas, and you'll never know the difference. You won't be able to tell the difference between the embossed areas and the areas that I added that white gel pen. Now this is the one I had that smudge on, so I'm going to cut this panel down even further with a smaller stitched rectangle die, taking my sand eraser and very, very lightly going over that area where my blending brush kind of went beyond that stencil, lightening that up a little bit. And then I'm going to take my blending brush that I used for the background for that blue and quickly go over that area just to kind of lighten up that green. So I have 3 card bases here, and these are kind of like an off-white that I have in my stash. I am using my Tombow Mono multi-glue to adhere those 2 larger panels flat down onto my card bases. And for that smaller panel that we ended up cutting down, I'm going to pop this up with some foam tape. And this is only because I'm out of fun foam. Otherwise, I would have just used a larger piece of fun foam for this. But I popped that up right in the center, and we are going to add our sentiments. So I have the Merry, the Christmas, and both of the shadows cut out, as well as that banner. So I prefer to use liquid glue to adhere the word to the shadow, just because it gives me a couple of seconds to kind of move things around and make sure that everything is lined up correctly. I'm kind of off camera a little bit here. I adjusted my camera to a spot it normally isn't in, so I wasn't aware that I was a little off camera here. But my word die I cut with white cardstock, and the shadow I cut with black, as well as the banner is black as well. So you can see that the words are pretty intricate, so I definitely recommend using a wet glue. You can use a double-sided adhesive before running this through your die cut machine. Just keep in mind that sometimes it's kind of hard to move that around and make sure it's lined up before you can actually stick it down. So for this little banner here, I am going to go ahead and treat that with my anti-static tool, stamping the word blessings with that Versamark ink, sprinkling on some of that white embossing powder, same embossing powder that we used for the white snow on that one tree. And again, making sure that the heat gun is heated up, and I heat set my sentiment there. Next, I kind of arranged my sentiments a little bit different for all 3 of my cards, just to kind of mix and match everything. For this first one, I just wanted to say Merry Christmas. Second one will say Christmas blessings. Actually, the second and third one will say Christmas blessings, but we're going to kind of switch it up a little bit. So for this third one here, I didn't leave myself a lot of room for a sentiment, being we had to cut down that panel. So I am just going to take some VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I'm going to stamp Christmas on one side and blessings on the other of the tree, and kind of leave that just as it is. For this middle one here, I'm going to just stamp the word blessings with that same VersaFine Onyx Black ink directly below that large Christmas sentiment, and I'm just going to glue that down with some Tombow Mono Multi Glue. For the third one, I'm going to adhere the Merry with the Tombow Mono Multi Glue, and I ended up cutting down this banner a little bit because I didn't stamp the Christmas in the center. So I just trimmed that down and popped that up with some foam tape. Next, I added a little bit of the Nuvo Aqua Shimmer Pen to kind of just some random areas on my little snowbank. I didn't fill in the entire area, but this will just add a little bit of shimmer to the snow. And here is a quick look at all three cards very quickly that we made with the Layering Pine stencil. This is a great stencil to have in your stash for mass producing. So if you make a lot of Christmas cards, this is definitely one that would be great to do that with. But that's it for today, guys. Thanks so much for stopping by and have a great day.